Hello, people. I am so sorry I'm late. I had some internet problems and I'm here now, but I'm also going to stall for a minute because I know Facebook has to notify you or YouTube has to notify you, and then you have to get here. So, this will, for those of you who aren't here and won't be here till later, this will be available as a replay later. So if you want to know what I think about the best way for a diabetic to start keto, this is going to be it. So um, I'm going to babble for another minute in case people aren't here yet. It says some are, but um, I just had a really nice walk today, and it was kind of short because it was really cold and my hands got cold. My hands get cold so easy. But um, just not just walking here, because in the winter I usually just sort of walk out my door and walk, but like we went to the park, and just being somewhere where my to-do list isn't is so relaxing. I find it that way. Hello, Cedric, and thank you for that WhatsApp message. Um, okay, so I'm gonna start the slideshow now, and at the end, we will have a Q&A. Does not have to be on specifically beginning keto for diabetics. It can be on anything. But this is what I'm going to start talking about. So, a little bit about the history of low carb and keto. This is really not new. The word keto being used instead of low carb is a little bit new, but this is still not new. This is older than, I presume, everybody watching me right now. If you're around in 1863, let me know. Send me a comment. And your secret. I want to know your secret. Um, are there any vampires watching me? So anyway, originally it was this letter on corpulence, addressed to the public, which was reprinted repeatedly over and over again. And basically, William Banting, who was not a doctor or anything, basically invented low carb because he discovered if he ate meat and vegetables, he lost weight. Um, we got about 80 years later a little bit more scientific. Dr. Russell Wilder defined the ketogenic diet as 4 parts of fat for every 1 part of protein and carb. Now, this specific ketogenic diet was invented to treat epilepsy in children who to prevent seizures. This was a lot of fat. 2 reasons for that. One being they're children, so still growing, so they need a lot of calories. Unlike me, I have plenty. Right here, I can eat anytime. Um, and the other reason being they really had to be in pretty intense ketosis to prevent their seizures. So, if you added up all the protein and carb they ate, if you ate, say, 40 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbs, that's 60 grams, you'd need 240 grams of fat, which is around 2,000 calories just in the fat. So that's what that original ketogenic diet was, which is not what most of us need to do because we are done growing and we don't need that many calories. At least I don't. I'm certainly done. I did more than my share of growing. It became more popular in 1958, first round of popularity, with a book called Eat Fat and Grow Slim. That was before my time still. But when I was 10, before I was paying attention to diet books, though, Dr. Atkins invented his diet revolution. And it's been reinvented, and there's Atkins products in all the stores. The man is long dead, but we still have all of his stuff. There is lots more history of low carb, and if you want to copy this off, or actually, I should probably copy it off afterwards. I'll put it in a comment before I log off. If you want to know more about the history of low carb. So my main point is that it's not something brand new. It's not like this whole idea of don't eat bread and potatoes is some newfangled thing. The average standard American diet is basically runs around 300 grams of carbs per day. So, I mean, technically, you can be low carb and still be pretty high. When I first started on insulin, I was keeping my carbs at about 100 grams a day, which I do not consider particularly low carb. In fact, it was pretty high carb compared to how I'd been eating before I was on insulin. But like, what exactly do those numbers mean? Because most of us, I mean, I do, but because I was on insulin for a really long time, but most of us don't go around counting carbs all the time. In the simplest non-chemistry, non-keto people terms, there are certain things you just have to cut out. Sugar entirely. It doesn't matter if it's natural sugar, like honey or maple syrup or whatever. If it's sugar, it's a carb. I'm not counting natural sweeteners like stevia or monk fruit or artificial sweeteners, but all forms of actual sugar, molasses, brown sugar, muscovado, no matter how healthy anyone else tells you it was, it's a carb. Wheat, rice, and basically all other grains. Even so-called healthy grains like quinoa has much more protein than most grains. It's still a grain. It's got piles of carbs. Your root vegetables, I've got some strange commas in here. For example, potatoes and carrots, I mean, aren't as bad as potatoes. Beets are one of the primary sources of sugar. Most fruit, not all fruit, but most fruit, like berries, berries are relatively low carb and fit, but like apples, bananas, pears, oranges, most fruit has been bred to have more and more sugar because people liked it more and they bought it more. So most fruit ends up off the table. Much dairy, not all dairy. Butter's good. Heavy whipping cream is very few carbs, but milk is relatively carby. And the lower fat it is, the higher carb it is, because if they take something out, the percentage of what left is higher. So, like, skim milk is the carbiest, the worst. And the other thing is legumes, like basically beans and um, split peas and peanuts and things like that. Um, you'll hear people talk about how healthy these things are, and they can be in certain circumstances. I mean, I don't object to dry beans. I cook them often for other people. My personal carb tolerance is not where they fit in my diet. Um, but they do also have a chunk of protein, and obviously, vegetarians rely on them a great deal. Um, and they do provide a good bit of protein. Um, so basically, carbohydrates are foods that, in general, break down into glucose and fructose to some degree, mostly glucose. There's also lactose, but that doesn't come up very much except when we're talking about dairy. There are some exceptions in that fiber does not really break down we don't break it down. We may have bacteria in our guts that break down some fibers and therefore eat it, but that's not affecting us so much. I mean, it might be affecting your GI health, but it's not affecting your personal metabolism. And there are some sugar alcohols that do or don't break down. and that may or may not, it depends on the sugar alcohol, cause GI distress if they're not breaking down too much. Erythritol seems to be a very popular one. It's not popular in terms of being in products because it's expensive. And if you're making a product, you generally use sorbitol or maltitol or something cheap. But in terms of when people buy them to use themselves, erythritol is a popular one. I don't happen to like it, but personal preference. So the reason that we're trying to keep the glucose, uh, limit the carbs, this is very basic, I realize. Glucose raises your blood glucose, right? Whether it's from straight glucose or from sugar or from grains or potatoes, it raises your blood glucose. Raising your blood glucose causes your pancreas to make more insulin, and it therefore raises your insulin. What if you're eating beyond your carbohydrate tolerance? It's raising your insulin too high. And the problem with that is it causes insulin resistance. Um, the other thing is, honestly, in cutting out most of the carbs out of your diet, like I will occasionally hear nutritionists say, like, don't cut out whole food groups. The carb food group overall is not really providing much of anything. Way back when, in the dark ages, when I was in school, we only had 4 food groups, and the bread and starches group, which would have been most of the carbs, we were specifically taught was to make meals more filling. It was to stretch the budget. But I mean, you get in carbohydrate foods generally, you get few vitamins, little protein, and very low mineral content. I mean, there's no type of sick you are where someone is going to prescribe that you should eat pasta or these are not things that are known to have the nutrition we need in them. So when you burn fat for fuel instead of glucose, which is what happens if you're eating low carb because you just don't have very many carbs to burn, so your body starts burning more fat instead. You make ketones. It's part of the process of burning fat produces ketones. And basically, that's really all being on a keto diet means is that you're eating in such a way that you produce ketones. Ketosis is a normal and natural phenomenon. It's not something weird or unusual. It is not a illness or health problem like diabetic ketoacidosis is something entirely different. Ketosis is so normal that the vast majority of us, when we wake up in the morning, no matter how we're eating, are in at least mild ketosis because we didn't eat all night. Unless you eat in your sleep or had insomnia and got up and ate a cake, generally, first thing in the morning, you're in ketosis. Before they're born, infants always, fetuses as they're developing, and then shortly after they're born, particularly if they're breastfed, infants are in ketosis. That seems to be part of what helps them grow and become people and then learn how to stand up and walk and all of that. So this is not some weird flaky thing that like has just happened. Humans have been in ketosis for tens of thousands of years, likely. Um, Peoples who lived near the tropics, near the equator, likely had much more fruit, vegetables, and grains available. But like people who lived in the Arctic and like Native Americans from northern Canada and from similar areas in Russia and Finland and stuff, those native peoples, they were mostly eating meat and fish. They didn't have lettuce growing in their yards as we evolved. Those people were likely in ketosis the vast majority of the time. Um, how much carb? There's a good bit of typos in this, guys. Sorry, that's on me. Um, how much carb you can eat will vary depending on your own tolerance. And the way Atkins used to describe this was start at 20 grams of carb and do that for a few weeks. He called that induction. So after you've done that for a couple weeks, he's like, increase carbs a little bit and see if you're still in ketosis. And keep doing that and while you keep losing weight. Um, now he was focused much more on weight loss than on um, diabetes, but since both are, well, type 2 diabetes is always caused by insulin resistance. And the vast majority of obesity is also caused by insulin resistance. So, really, if we're talking about weight loss or if we're talking about diabetes, we're kind of talking about the same thing. Um, how much protein you need also varies in a diet. It depends on your needs. I mean, you need some for muscles, more if you're trying to build muscle. You need some for enzymes, which are the parts of your body inside of your cells that make all the reactions happen. Um, but if we have extra protein, like if I need, I'm just making some numbers up. I don't know. I've never measured my protein needs this precisely, but if I need 50 grams of protein a day and I eat 70 grams of protein, then I've got 20 grams extra. And if I don't need any more enzymes and I didn't lift enough weights to build any muscle, that extra protein something has to be done with it. But there is no way to store protein in our bodies. We can store carbs. We store it as it's called glycogen, and we can store fat, as we know. Look at my belly; I'm storing some right now, but we have no way to store protein. So, how much fat you need depends on why you're doing a ketogenic diet. Okay, like I was saying earlier, that the small children who are doing a ketogenic diet to prevent seizures need a very, very high level of fat, partly to be in very intense ketosis all the time, and partly because they were still growing and just needed large amounts of calories. And there are some people, like when I go on YouTube and I watch some of the people who talk about ketogenic diets, some of them are what I would say is much younger and much trimmer than me. And they may talk about like getting enough fat. How much fat do you need? I'm of the opinion personally that this is some of the fat I can eat. So I don't think there's any minimum percentage I have to get in my diet. If I keep carbohydrate low and protein reasonable, the amount of fat I need is what tastes good, what makes my meal satisfying. And frankly, in my case, the less the better, because let's just imagine again, I'm just pulling a number out of the air that my body needs 100 grams of fat a day to have enough calories. Well, if I only eat 50, that means I'm burning 50 grams off of me. And I would rather eat me. Um, a friend of mine on the group used to joke that the reason you don't need fat bombs is because you are your own fat bomb. And like, yes, I am. Um, so Um, yeah, basically it's choice. Are you going to burn your own fat or gobs of cream cheese and fat bumps and such? I joke about cream cheese because a long time ago, doing low carb, like decades ago, I had literally hundreds of keto or low carb cheesecake recipes. And I had even for more savory recipes where I wasn't going for sweet, I had awful lot of recipes that started with like 2 bars of cream cheese. Um, that did work to control my blood glucose for quite some time, but I certainly didn't lose any weight eating all of that fat on a regular basis. Um, but that's me. Um, in my opinion, if any guru out there says that calories don't matter and it is your intention to burn your own fat as you're reversing your diabetes, I would not listen to them. Calories do matter. The way we measure them isn't accurate. There's a lot of issues with the calorie model. And no matter how short you are in calories, if your insulin is high, you're not going to lose weight because insulin is the fat storage hormone. It has to drop in order for us to experience fat burning. If we keep calories low and insulin is still high, then basically what happens is our metabolism slows down. We've all heard about this. But if we keep both calories down and insulin down, but low insulin lets us burn calories, and the low calories means we need to. So they don't matter as precisely as people seem to think, and there's calculators out there that'll tell you how many you need and how quickly you'll lose, and that stuff's all very generic and it's very hand waving. It's not very accurate, but they do matter. So I'm going to talk about the three main ways that the three broad categories of ways of doing a ketogenic diet. One of the very popular ones is carnivore, which many years ago we used to call the meat and egg diet. It's or the zero carb diet because it basically means you eat meat and eggs. I personally feel that if I were doing this, it would have taken me a lot longer to reverse my diabetes because I would have been getting too much protein for me. And that protein then would, because your body can't store it, your body turns it into glucose. And so that would have slowed my reversing my diabetes down. Probably have because meat usually comes with fat. So I could have eaten much more calories before I was full, so it would have probably slowed my weight loss down too. But it does work, and it can work for some people. One of the people who reversed their diabetes before I joined the group was eating 2 meals a day and pretty much carnivore, and he did fine. Um, so, um, when my best friend asked me, he got a diabetes diagnosis and asked me what to do because he knew I'd reverse mine. I knew he wouldn't eat vegetables. So I suggested carnivore to him and it worked. Now, I had much longer, like 30 years of diabetes, 12 of which when I was on insulin. It probably would have taken me longer. I think I could have got there eventually. Um, but honestly, my real objection to carnivore is if I'm going to go out and splurge on a prime rib, I need it smothered in mushrooms and onions. And I like vegetables in general. Um, on the other extreme, we have people who do vegetarian or vegan keto, and we do have a number of them in the group, and some of them are successful doing this. The big trick is it's like with beans that most of the vegetarian sources of protein are also a bit carby. So it's a lot harder to keep your carbs really strictly down. Um, from what I understand, black soybeans are the lowest carb bean. And there's a product called Quorn, which I'm going to spell because the captions didn't catch it last time. Quorn. And it's basically made from a mushroom. And there's a bunch of different products, like depending on what you buy, some of them are low carb, some are not. That looked to me when I was looking at the nutritional facts like a pretty good source for vegetarians. But I'm in the middle, which is weird because I'm extreme about so many things. But with regards to the type of keto I like doing, I'm in the middle of the road where I want to eat veggies and meat. Um, And the other reason I like veggies, besides the fact, mushroom and onions, who doesn't like that? Besides that, is veggies are a very, very low calorie way to completely fill up your stomach until you're stuffed. And we tend to do that in the group with um, raw meals, which basically are really big, ridiculously big salads, or cooked meals that are often have broccoli or cauliflower um, or something like that. This is the Ridiculously Big Salad book, which teaches the specific framework of the way I eat and the way many of the people in the group eat, in that there's 4 levels or whatever to the RBS book, to an RBS. There is a gigantic pile of greens, which can be as big as you want. And then there is the protein. There is the dressing, which has most of the fat. And then there's the extra layer, for adding in stuff to make things more flavorful. And this book has tons and tons of recipes for different salad dressings, different salads, and just so many ideas. And also how to batch cook protein so that, like tonight, I had a taco salad in that I had the hamburger flavored with taco seasoning, but I used ranch dressing on it. It took me about 5 minutes to make that. It took considerably longer to eat it. And then sometime later, she came out with the cooked books. The book that has the cooked ridiculously big salad. That's what we've been calling it, the cooked RBS. Um, and this has tons of recipes. And while these recipes do require cooking every day, they require 5 to 10 minutes of cooking. I mean, there's almost no prep. Um, and there's a huge variety of things in here. I've been cooking since I was 11 years old, like regularly. And I got ideas from this book that had never occurred to me and got exposed to tastes I'd never had. So it's highly recommended. And these links are in this post that you're looking at, or in the description box on YouTube, the post on Facebook, I hope. So a big part of my premise is this: a low carb diet with time restricted eating is the fastest, most effective way to reverse insulin resistance, which starts you on the path from fat, weak, and sick to trim, strong, and healthy. I didn't get into the time restricted eating very much, yes. And I will get into that a bit more in a webinar I have starting next week. Basically, time restricted eating, you may have heard of it referred to as intermittent fasting, involves eating within a window. Sometimes it involves more extended fasts, going more than a day without food. And we will get into all of that in the webinar, much more specifics about the keto diet as well. If there's a sign up in this post on Facebook or in the description box on YouTube with the sign up for the webinar, there's a link in there. We're going to go in much more depth about keto. We're going to talk quite a bit about time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, or even extended fasting. And something that I'm going to tell you right up front: our society is not set up for people that eat like this. This is not considered normal. So while it is a very simple way to eat it's got a low cost, it's got extremely low prep time or anything else, it's very much outside of the norm. So even though it's simple, it's not easy. There's temptations all the time. I was talking to some people on this topic today. I live very rurally, but I can't drive 10 minutes without seeing a fast food joint. You can't watch TV without tons of commercials for snack foods and junk food and lots of stuff that, in my opinion, isn't even food. This means it isn't easy. It's also just not easy to make this large of a change and stick with it. Um, there are some things that I think make it easier, and those include adapting your way of eating because we're not all the same, and too many diets seem to think we are, like one size fits all, which it does not. As anyone who's ever bought nylons knows, one size doesn't fit all. And how we're going to choose our window, which foods we like, don't like, are all going to make a big difference. And how we implement this for ourselves. People who are looking how to adapt it are way ahead because they're, instead of saying, oh, I can't do this because of X, they're saying, okay, I have this challenge X. How do I make this work for me? When you're looking for that answer and you're adapting things to yourself as best you can, much more likely to succeed. That's huge. Unfortunately, the second one is hard to imagine when you start this, which is how much you need to change your relationship with food. We've been raised to think food is, cookies are for when you've had a bad day. My mom used to let us get ice cream sundaes whenever we got a good report card. So, therefore, comfort. Food is for comfort. Food is for celebration. Food is for reward. Um, all sorts of things that we associate food with, other than like, this is yummy and it nourishes my body. And those really should be our criteria. This is something that's delicious that I'm enjoying eating and that keeps me and maximizes my health. And it takes a lot of taking apart because we've all been brainwashed for so long about food. It takes a lot of taking apart to really think this stuff through and profoundly change your relationship with food. And finally, one of the things that I think is very, very important is creating a vision of your future, a really compelling vision of the future you, of the things you'll be able to do without the limitations you have now, due to both weight and diabetes. As you heal, as you get better, as you get stronger and healthier, what will you be able to do? And if you can paint in your imagination a really vivid picture of that, that really helps you when you're negotiating with a bowl of pasta. Am I going to eat the pasta or not? That vision of you can be tempting, almost like enticing you towards it if you get that built. And these are what I've noticed as very important mindset changes that it seems like most people go through while they're going through this process. If you don't want to wait for the webinar, I've also linked to the 3-day challenge below. That comes right away. Like literally, if you fill it out right now, within 10-15 minutes, you'll have an email from Amanda with a shopping list. And then for the next 3 days, you'll get videos showing you how to cook the meals that we're have found to be most successful in the group. And that is, wow, I did rush through that a little bit, I think, because I was late. But I'm still here if we have any questions. And if not, I'm going to wrap up because I still have dishes to do. I did eat before I started, but I didn't get my dishes done yet. If there's any questions, I will answer them now. And if not, okay, I'm not getting any. So I'm going to log off now and cut this short for the people who watch it in the replay. Thanks for joining me, and I'll hopefully see you at the webinar next week. Bye-bye.